Welcome, everyone, and welcome back to another IS-PEC Talks. Today, we're delighted to host Dr. Craig Lockwood, one of the leading global voices in evidence implementation and a senior member of the Joanna Briggs Institute at the University of Adelaide. Craig has spent decades,
Yes.
decades, helping clinicians, educators, policymakers, and health systems moving from knowing to doing, a classic IS-PEC topic, turning evidence into meaningful, sustainable practice. Through his work at JBI, Craig has trained and mentored thousands of people worldwide, developed practical approaches for implementing evidence, and helped shape the global conversation about how we close the gap between research and real-world care. His perspective on what it truly takes to support change at the front line is exactly why we are so excited to have him here with us. Craig, thanks for being
Thank
here.
you. Thank
So,
you, Moriah. It's great to be with you.
yeah, and it's also the timing. We really appreciate the time and effort you're putting into this, so thank you.
Yeah.
So the JBI model has a strong focus on feasibility, appropriateness, meaningfulness, not just effectiveness. How did that
Mm.
emphasis develop in your own thinking, and why do you believe those dimensions matter so much to implementation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I actually love the question so much because it really gets to me, to the heart of what evidence-based practice is really all about. So effectiveness is a great start. It's useful to know what works or what does not work or what's the risk-benefit ratios, those kinds of things. But effectiveness tells us whether something works in controlled circumstances, and healthcare is rarely controlled. You know,
Is
so
anything controlled?
well, this is quite an epistemic question at the moment, isn't it? But in terms of healthcare thinking, patient preferences, those are actually a type of evidence, and we should be thinking about and integrating those into our planning for practice and for policy. So if we have effectiveness, but we don't have feasibility or meaningfulness or applicability, what we have is an RCT without an implementation pathway, essentially, I believe. So, these things matter to implementation and to healthcare because they matter to patients. They matter to service delivery. And just to sort of expand on that a little bit, we were the first, I think, in 2005 to really expand from thinking about the no-do gap into a patient-centered evidence framework that would included context and culture and patient experience, and said, well, if we want to be serious about EBP that is person-centered or patient-centered, then we need a new conceptualization of evidence. And so that was an epistemic shift away from the primacy of does it work, and then by moving out to frame the understandings of how individuals engage with evidence. So feasibility, for example, can it be done here in our place, in this local context? Appropriateness, does it fit our context? And then, of course, meaningfulness, does it matter to people? Because a highly effective intervention that is deeply unpleasant as a sensory experience would not be favored by people. And so rounding all of that stuff out, I think, is important for evidence-based healthcare. Yeah, so that to me is really the heart of the scenario there in terms of why those dimensions matter so much for implementation, because implementation won't be stickable if it doesn't respond to human culture and human lived experience and human understandings of health and well-being. And we just simply can't measure those without feasibility, appropriateness, and meaningfulness.
And you
Yeah,
emphasize patients, but you also include, you said patients and people, but you also focus a lot on providers as well and their experiences, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And that's not just simply about reducing EBP to technical skills and saying, do people have the knowledge to do a technical skill? It's about, do you understand when someone walks into an outpatient clinic, what their lived experience speaks to as maybe, a 5 year or 10-year organ donor transplant recipient and therefore a survivor, because that's going to be different to somebody who's waiting for an organ transplant. And that'll be different to somebody else in a different clinic who's about to start their first cycle of chemotherapy. And so getting all of these lived experience perspectives actually really matters for how we provide care to people rather than just deliver therapeutic doses of interventions.
Right. Okay. So JBI, you provided training to again, we mentioned thousands of people, specifically maybe thousands of clinicians using JBI's PACES and GRIP programs. So can you explain those programs briefly and talk about what you learned about what actually supports clinicians when they try to change practice or implement evidence-based practice?
Yeah, I can try, but I'm not sure brief is something that I do very well.
So far, you're doing great.
Oh, thank you
We
so
can
much.
also link into, if there's more, we could link to documents in the show
Oh,
notes.
cool. Yeah, happy to do that. So these are online software tools that we developed in parallel with the way healthcare thinks about safety and quality. And what we brought into the thinking about safety and quality was a pluralistic conceptualization of evidence, which we've just talked about, that modeling approach. And so PACES as a piece of software has two functions and two features. And the first two functions are fundamental to any kind of project management software. It's about how do you manage people and how do you provide project support. So we can think of PACES as providing project support and people support. Set up a project, invite people, manage teams, manage sampling, manage data collection fidelity and analysis. PACES does that. So those are the two core functions. And the first feature, though, that separates PACES as useful implementation software from everything else that's out there is that it includes the evidence base. So if people want to do a project and they could pick any one of hundreds of topics, the evidence for those topics is already included, embedded in PACES, and it's updated frequently. So it's always up to date, it's always clinically relevant. And it's not just a summary of evidence, so here's a p-value or here's a confidence interval or here's a grade SOF. Work it out yourself, then do something with it. The JBI approach to evidence is actually to then create recommendations that are actionable. And we use those to provide measurable ability for people to action change based on the evidence. So that's completely different to a existing software. And the second feature of PACES is that it embeds GRIP, which is a software process-based situational analysis that helps guide people to think about if we've done some data collection in PACES that we would call that time one or baseline data. That gives us some kind of measurement, maybe of compliance against best practice, for example. But what do you do with that data? So normally in quality, that just goes back to management who realize we have a performance issue. But in the way we envision person-centered care with change EBP led by clinicians, it actually becomes, let's give that data to the clinical groups responsible for the delivery of care. And then using GRIP, we can help them walk through a process of evaluating, well, what were the barriers to improve performance here for us as an organization? Not personal, but structural and organizational and process related barriers. And then once we've identified the barriers, what kind of enablers? And then, okay, so let's now build our enablers into a strategy. And so it's about a mechanism of action, which aligns really strongly. You would know Jeremy Grimshaw very well. And perhaps you're familiar with the work of Martin Eccles as well. They talked a lot about this need to make sure that if we're doing implementation, that we consider at least the barriers and enablers that are available to us in our local context. So those are um, the functions and features really of PACES. It's about giving clinicians tools that help them measure, but also help them organize and collate and manage feedback, and then help them take action based on feedback. If I can go a little further, just for
Of
another
course.
minute or two. So how does this really support clinicians or, any health professional, if you want to broaden it out from clinical care a little bit? Is that when organizations invest in their clinical staff to be co-participants or leads of EBP, so to do implementation using evidence, they're saying, this is important to us. We're paying attention to it. And when you pay attention to something as a leader, you actually communicate to everyone that works with you that this is important. So you can change the narrative around what's important in healthcare by being a leader who pays attention to what you believe to be really important. And this actually comes out of marketing. There's a a UK marketing guru, what's his name? Rory Sutherland, who said back in 2018, what we pay attention to affects what we think is important. And by changing what we think is important, we change what we prioritize in action. And so, PACEs and GRIP and giving clinicians access to tools and resources that actually help them to transform their practice using evidence and set that up in sustainable ways. That's leaders saying, we believe this is important and we're going to collaborate with you on this. So I think those sorts of things help, like having tools and resources that connect people and programs together helps to create sustainable change because it's internally led types of change.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, I'm laughing because I feel like I'm already talking too much.
No, it's just everything. I mean, I have so many neurons firing in my brain because, I teach leadership and organizational behavior and so much of what you're saying, just if we go back to the Hawthorne studies where they just focusing on what makes the
Yeah,
environment more productive for workers will make them more productive, right? So it's similar to what we're focusing on and,
yeah,
putting the effort on there. And then, so meaning we could talk about paces and grip for hours, but we only have 5 more minutes and I want to get into the implementation science. I have so many questions, but maybe we'll do another podcast specifically on those. So you've worked in health systems from Australia to Africa to Europe. Is there a moment or a lesson from your global work that changed how you think about supporting evidence use on the ground?
yeah. So this is a really interesting one. I've been involved in a huge range of activities and topics. Like, so people bring their topic to us, and we then partner with them as an intermediary organizer. We should do a pod on intermediaries one day.
Okay.
So
You
I've
available
I've
next
worked
week? Just
with
kidding.
people who've done implementation for cord care of newborns, but they're actually in really remote African contexts and there's no sterile materials. Or people that have done improvement and implementation work around hand hygiene when the only water is the water that's collected off a roof into a drum on the side of the clinic. And then also I've worked with, the very latest intensive care units, where everything's absolutely cutting edge. But the consistent moment is when you see the people that you're working with get the aha, I get it moment. So that's when they see that their professional role isn't to do projects on the side every now and then to improve something and then go back to the daily grind that almost burns them out. It's to actually to see their role and purpose as inclusive of working across teams, units, and divisions to deliver strategic improvements, to gain knowledge with their staff, with their colleagues in that workplace, to lift the vision and to improve and to move from survive to thrive by doing work that returns professional satisfaction and professional capacity. So that opportunity to engage with practitioners and policymakers is a great experience.
So, I mean, that links a lot to what you talk about in terms of facilitation as really the core mechanism of
Mm.
change, right? So, uh, what skills do you think these people need? Because people can view facilitation as, well, I'm telling you to do it, so just do it, which we know never happens. So, what types of skills do people need for this facilitation to actually succeed?
Yeah, so facilitation is almost easier to describe what it contributes than to say what it is in a sense, isn't it? Um, but good facilitation is really a collection and coordination of intermediary type behaviors at a fairly high level where a facilitator is promoting teamwork and helping teams to work together toward a common mission, a common vision, or a common purpose. And then identifying, all right, so we've got an X amount of internal resource and beyond that, we need these additional things. So they have to also be able to do the knowledge brokering type activities to recognize the right timing and resource to bring the right resource and the right timing to bring resources in and work out how to yeah to help bring what is needed at a particular point in time, whether it's a certain like a gatekeeper leader or a day-to-day leadership, additional resources, things that will remove some of the barriers to broad unit participation into a change process. Good facilitators, I think, do those sorts of things.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are Meaning there are people that are, it's the born versus bred, leadership discussion almost. There are people that naturally could do this, but even if they can't, they can learn how. It's not you either know how to do it or you don't.
I'm completely on board with that view that if somebody doesn't feel like they're a natural born leader, they could actually become really transformative. And if they're a natural born leader, then there's definitely still room for improvement, growth, and development.
Right,
Because healthcare is too complex just to have too many static people in positions. We just want to shift that needle and help move things forward.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so one final question we usually end with a little bit of advice to our students. So many of our students, they feel overwhelmed by this gap, right? They come to me and they say midwives don't practice to their full scope of practice. And it's just changing a whole
Yeah.
system. It's changing the
Yeah.
policy, it's changing the organization or nurse practitioner, whatever the change is. So what do you wish, what message would you give to these early career implementation scientists? What do you wish they understood about it's okay to start small, but ultimately it will lead to meaningful change?
I actually think the secret, the more time I spend working with health systems, the actual secret is to start small and stay small. And so what I mean by that is to start with a group that you can engage with and engage with them longer term. Don't go, I've done something small, now I want to do something big. Big is actually the cumulative result of long-term meaningful engagement. And if I could go back and tell myself that from 20 years ago, that is the one single thing I would tell myself is start small, stay small, build cumulative knowledge with a group of people and what that achieves in terms of impact and meaningfulness will be incredible. It'd be inspiring.
I love that. Start
So if
small
I,
and stay small.
yeah,
I like it. I love it. Thank you,
yeah,
Craig,
that
so
would be
much for
it.
your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to take you up on the offer to do a podcast on intermediaries, a podcast on grip. We have many. We'll send a whole list.
Let's do a whole series. That
I,
sounds
I I think
fantastic.
we should. I
Yeah.
think we should. Thank you.